Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for the Center for Economic Development's The Future of Energy. My name is John Grueling, and I'm happy to be your host for today's event. First off, I'd like to give a special thank you to ComEd for sponsoring our program and also being one of the presenters today. ComEd's commitment to economic development throughout their service area is really a corporate value that Will County and its businesses all benefit from. So again, thanks to ComEd for your support and a trusted ally in the economic development business. While the title of today's report is The Future of Energy, it certainly represents a very ambitious undertaking. In full disclosure, we will be discussing only two aspects of this critically important issue. Our first speaker today, George Crabtree, will discuss where are the batteries going? It sounds like my problem when I'm in my kitchen drawers. And he'll be addressing the demand for stored energy to meet the needs of society at large, our cell phones and et cetera. And then the technology to meet that demand with his work, and certainly at Argonne and other places. Our second speaker will be talking about ComEd's deployment of advanced energy technology to improve reliability of on-demand electricity at the very local level. We've all heard about the smart grid. Daniel's going to speak to us about some of the details of that and why that's so critical for meeting local energy demand in a very secure and reliable way. Just a little housekeeping. Both of our speakers are willing to take questions after each of their presentations. So while you're watching and listening and you have a question, please ask the questions using the question feature on your screen. It's very simple to do that. And once the presenter is finished, we'll pose the questions. And also recordings of today's event will be posted on the Will County CED YouTube channel. Yes, we have CED TV on YouTube, and it's a channel you should, and it's free. You don't have to subscribe to it. So now, on to the program. Our first speaker today, George Crabtree, is the director of the Joint Center for Energy Storage at Argonne National Laboratory. And he's a distinguished professor of physics, electrical, and mechanical engineering at the University of Illinois, Chicago. He leads research on creating next-generation electricity storage technology beyond lithium-ion batteries. Dr. Crabtree has published over 450 scientific papers in peer-reviewed journals, and he's been cited over 18,000 times. That's more hits than my LinkedIn page has gotten, Doctor. I appreciate how important that is. He has won many awards for his research, including the Department of Energy's Award for Outstanding Scientific Research. He's won that 4 times. The Award for Distinguished Performance at Argonne Laboratory, that's a 2-time winner. And R&D 100 Award for the Magneto Optical Flux Imaging, which I have no clue what that is, but I'm sure he was an outstanding presenter to receive that award. And the prestigious Cumberland ONA's Prize for Experimental Research in Superconductivity. And that's only awarded once every 3 years, and Dr. Crabtree was the second person to receive that award. He is also a member of the National Academy of Sciences and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. We are extremely honored to have George Crabtree join us today to answer the question, where are batteries going? Doctor.
Wow. Thanks so much, John. Wonderful introduction, so flattering. I'm actually not that good, but what a pleasure to be here and talk to the folks on the Will County Committee. And as John mentioned, I'm happy to take questions. I'm actually a guy who likes to be interrupted, although that's a little hard to do in the video format, but please do put your questions into the chat and I'd be happy to answer it. So I do want to talk a little bit about batteries and energy. I want to talk about where batteries have been very briefly, just to set the context, and that basically is personal electronics. That's been around since 1991 when Sony brought out the first lithium-ion battery. for a camcorder. And of course, they did not know at that time that it would take off with laptops, with smartphones, with all kinds of things that we now carry around in our pockets. And the second big sort of revolution for batteries is coming. It's emerging now, electric vehicles. We got a very good start on it. There are probably, if I remember right, in the United States, it's maybe 2 or 3 or 4% of new cars are electric in some form, hybrid or pure battery. And the projections are that over the next 10 years, it's really going to take off. Eventually with a full transition. You may remember that GM announced that after 2035, it will not make any more gasoline personal cars. Of course, that's still, what, 14 years away, so let's see what actually happens. But that just shows the extent to which it's really moving. And the last one is the electricity grid. So we're working hard on making all those things happen. So if you would go back one slide, sorry, I got ahead of myself of my slides. I just wanted to note that in 2019, that was last year, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry was given for the lithium-ion battery, and there are the 3 winners: John Goodenough, Stan Whittingham, and Akira Yoshino. And I think the Nobel Foundation found the right words for it. It's there to the right. Their research laid the foundation of a wireless fossil fuel-free society, and that's what we're seeing. So next slide, we'll talk a little bit about these 3 societal transformations. Interestingly, the battery in your cell phone is pretty small. It doesn't cost much because it's so small, so it's a tiny fraction of the cost of the phone. Whereas in the electric vehicle, you need a battery which is about 10,000 times bigger just to power the car. And that represents, the cost of the battery itself represents about 25% of the cost of the EV, the purchase price. So it's really a different animal. If you look at the electricity grid, you need a battery typically that's 1,000 to 10,000 times bigger than the EV battery. And the main things it is used for on the grid are to stabilize wind and solar against variations because of passing clouds, which might be a few minutes, or because of consecutive overcast or calm days. So that can be up to, actually, if you look at the past record, up to 10 days in a row in some parts of the country. So these 3 batteries are really different animals. And to the right there, you see the climate challenge, which both electric vehicles and the electricity grid conversion to wind and solar is addressing. We have to get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050 throughout the entire economy. That is an enormously ambitious challenge, but judging from the climate science that we now believe, that's what we have to do. So the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about EVs. And I mentioned they're on track to become dominant. Here's some numbers. So today, and this is as of 2020, so 2021 may be slightly different, 43 different models of EVs that you can buy in the States. By 2024, which is just three years away, if you believe all the announcements from the various car companies, there will be 127. So it's really going to take over. I mentioned that GM will stop making gasoline vehicles after 2035. And back in October of last year, California actually banned the sale of gasoline vehicles after the same date. So that's evidence that things are really moving, and there's enormous motivation and enormous momentum for the EV transition. The lithium-ion battery pack will evolve enormously as well. Today, it's something like $137 per kilowatt hour to buy the battery pack. That's been falling. In fact, the price over the last 10 years of lithium-ion batteries has fallen by almost a factor of 10, not quite. And it has become a poster child for price reductions. By 2030, there are predictions, and of course these are predictions, but it may fall up to around $55 a kilowatt hour. So those EVs that the battery now makes up 25% of the cost are really going to fall in price. And they will become competitive not only over the life of the vehicle, but even for purchase price. Predictions are by about 2025 or so. So this is really a major change. Next slide, we'll talk about the carbon emissions from the whole transportation sector. And it turns out personal cars are about half of the emissions from all of transportation. So what you see on the right there is a graph versus time up to 2070 of gigatons of carbon dioxide per year emitted by transportation. The blue at the bottom, that's passenger cars. The green, that's medium and heavy trucks. Marine shipping is the sort of orange, and aviation is the purple on top. And you see a big notch at 2020. That's because of the pandemic. Everybody quit traveling. All means of transportation suffered a decline. And that was good for CO2 emissions, but we're going to recover from that. This particular projection doesn't show us going to 0 by 2050, and that's a problem we'll have to deal with. So the battery, the lithium-ion battery, will be pretty good at decarbonizing passenger cars if we can get to 100% penetration. It's not so good for medium and heavy duty trucks. It's probably not at all suitable for shipping and only for very short aviation flights. So we need R&D to go beyond lithium ion to a high energy density battery, maybe twice or 3 times the energy density of lithium ion, to decarbonize certainly shipping and aviation and the heaviest duty trucks. So the lithium ion batteries, they're just too heavy, they're too expensive, takes too long to recharge them for the long distance applications, because in the case of trucking, you want that truck running all the time, and if you have to pause for a couple of hours to recharge it, that represents a loss. So that's the transportation story. Next slide, we'll talk about the grid. And the big problem now, I should give a little history here. Every solar installation, and there have been many of them in the last couple of years, and Daniel can certainly comment on this if he likes, across the country, but every solar installation has been accompanied by a big battery installation. And a lithium-ion battery typically can discharge for 4 hours at full power, and that's it. It can't go longer. So for intraday variations, because of clouds or because of wind, gusts of wind, that's fine. It's great for extending solar power a couple of hours past sunset. So that's the maximum peak demand, usually is right around sunset, and great to have the battery for that. But it really can't do consecutive cloudy or calm days. So what we do now, of course, is stabilize wind and solar with natural gas turbines. You can run them as long as you like, just supply the gas. But the downside, they emit CO2. So what we really need is a long duration discharge battery. That's the challenge for the grid. Next slide, we'll talk about the an innovation. J. Caesar, that's the organization that I direct at Argonne. And by the way, it's a consortium of 19 partners across the country and has a 10-year term, which we're almost 8 years into it. So we're nearing the end of our term. But one of the things we have done during that time is to innovate a long duration discharge battery. So we recognized that problem in 2015, which was about when a few other sort of leading thinkers also recognized it. And we began to explore technologies that would give you long duration discharge, based on, this is the middle bullet on the left, inexpensive earth abundant materials. So things like sulfur, which there's plenty of, and plenty of things like lots of that. Oxygen, get it right from the atmosphere. So these things would be ideal. It would simplify enormously the supply chain, which for lithium-ion batteries is pretty complicated. It's international, and there is a chance of shortage, especially with the EV surge coming. So it's what's called the bottom bullet there. It's what's called a redox flow battery design, liquid electrodes instead of solid electrodes. So in 2017, we had already developed a technology in the laboratory that would, for long duration discharge, we spun out a startup company called Form Energy, which was very aggressive at about $120 million in just 3 years. It explored some related chemistries based on the same concept that we initiated. And in 2020, it was May, signed its first contract with Great River Energy. That is Minnesota's second largest utility. And the contract was to deliver in 2023 a battery that discharges at full power for about 6 days. And compared to lithium ion, which is limited to 4, maybe 6 hours at best, that is a huge step forward. We'll see how it works. I think we consider, and so does Form Energy, that the Great River Energy project is a demonstration. It's a test. How will it do? If it does well, then I would expect to see a lot more sales and deliveries and installations of this long duration battery in the following, say, 2 to 3 years. But we'll find out with a real test. Next slide talks about the energy storage ecosystem. And this is really important. In fact, our long duration battery is a great example here. There's the raw material supply chain. I mentioned that's pretty complicated and international for lithium ion. You need graphite, which you might think there's plenty of, but you need a very special high quality kind of graphite, most of which is processed in China. You need cobalt, you need nickel, you need manganese. These are all transition metals, some of which are hard to come by. Cobalt in particular mostly comes from Democratic Republic of Congo. They have plenty of human rights issues and other issues that, you know, you might rather not depend on them for your supply chain. So, as I mentioned, the Form Energy battery actually simplifies that enormously. Then there's the battery technology itself. That's the center circle. And to the right, the emerging applications. And what we've learned in JCs are you must make the battery for the application. If you say, here's a very interesting battery, but I'm not sure what the application is, probably go nowhere. If you say, for example, I'm going to make a long duration battery because there's an enormous need for it on the grid, then you're dealing with the entire ecosystem. And this is, I think, what counts. So there are a couple of, I think there's another click coming that says, what are some of the emerging applications? Actually, already mentioned them. For regional passenger flight, you need a battery with 800 watt hours per kilogram energy density. For comparison, lithium ion has maybe the best you could do is 300 watt hours per kilogram. So that will never be a lithium ion battery. That has to be beyond lithium ion. And for grid stabilization, you need, as I mentioned, up to 10 days of discharge in the worst cases. And we're getting there with 6 days. And of course, that Form Energy battery has to be proven in practice. And there are many other competing long duration storage options as well that are being developed. So the bottom right-hand side there, the lesson is you need a diversity of batteries for a diversity of uses. Let's see, next slide, I think. We'll talk about, the Joint Center. I mentioned we have 19 partner institutions, including Argonne. So that includes MIT, for example, on the East Coast. It includes Berkeley and Stanford on the West Coast. It includes University of Illinois at Champaign, also the one at Chicago, and lots of other universities. Has one private company, and 6 national labs, including Argonne. So we have a 10-year term. It ends, we're almost up to our end of our 8th year, which will be in June of this year. We have a coast-to-coast national presence and a long enough time scale, 10 years, to really look at the ecosystem. And I think that's important. Smaller operations cannot look at the supply chain, at the next generation application, and then be strategic about developing technologies to meet them. In the center, you see our sort of signature idea. We want to make transformative materials, chemistries, and architectures. And we start at the bottom, as we say. So we start with atoms, with crystals, with chemical molecules, form them into materials with targeted properties so that we'll be able to make a battery with targeted performance for a particular application. And up at the top, you see our collaborators. We don't actually, of course, make the scaled up battery. That's due to our collaborators like Form Energy. We hope to transfer it to the commercial sector. Besides Form Energy, we have two other startups, Sepion, which looks at membranes, polymer membranes, part of every battery, and Blue Current, which looks at solid state electrolytes, which many people think will be the next big innovation, which you could apply to a lithium ion battery or to almost any other battery as well. So next slide is my last slide. It says, thanks very much. Very happy to have been able to talk with you, and please do ask questions.
Thank you, George. Fascinating stuff, and I'm sure there's some questions out there. I have one to start, George. As we get more and more into the era of the battery, where are these batteries going to be manufactured, do you think? Are we going to be making them here? Or are they going to be made in China? Or what's the reliability of our supply chain when it comes to future batteries?
This is, I think, the $64 question, actually, John, that is right on target. So if you look historically, it was Japan who brought out the lithium ion battery. For 10 years or more, they were dominant. South Korea got into the business in the aughts and the almost up to 2010. And then China decided to get in, and they are now the biggest player. They've developed the fastest. If you look at gigafactories, we've got one in the States. That's the Tesla gigafactory in Nevada, a couple more planned. China has something like 50.
Oh,
it's amazing. And they account for something like 60% of the world battery production. It was a few years ago, really with the advent of EVs, that a lot of countries realized if we want to play in the automotive game, which Germany and UK and France already do, very important to them, we better be able to make our own batteries because we don't want to depend completely on a foreign competitor. So I think Europe got serious first. That was probably 3 years ago that they decided they wanted to actually own the whole supply chain. They wanted to supply from reliable sources within Europe, preferably. They wanted to build their gigafactories in Europe and sell those batteries to car makers in Europe. And they're probably a year or 2 years ahead of where the US is. US had the same feeling, but didn't start as early. It's big time now. Tesla, I think it's remarkable. Here's a fact, factoid. Tesla, a sort of impudent startup, is now the most successful EV maker in the world. Makes more cars than any, well, it has one gigafactory that supplies its most of its cars in the US, and it outsells all the other brands in China, in spite of the fact that China has many more gigafactories and many more cars. But no single manufacturer does better than Tesla. So something about the United States is really hopeful and really promising. And we do have the capability. There's the proof. We can do it playing by our rules, which I think is something we ought to keep in mind. But the plan, certainly now the Biden administration is supporting EVs enormously for their own decarbonization and climate reasons, as well as economic reasons. We'd like to be a powerhouse in the automotive business as well. So there are many, many more gigafactories coming. I think Europe is ahead of us, and everybody is talking about the supply chain. So turns out there's always more material around than you think. Lithium, for example, could be in short supply. Now it turns out, well, in California, you can actually find some geothermal brine pools that have a lot of lithium in them, and over a period of years, we could develop at least a partial supply chain for the lithium that we need. So although we're behind now, I think there's no doubt there's a lot of momentum to catch up. And I'm personally confident that we will. May not be easy, but I do think we can do it.
Thank you, George.
So some other questions that we have in the queue, one that we see a few times is with respect to useful life of batteries, both the current tech, the lithium tech, and maybe some of the new tech, sulfur. What's the status of, or what's the plan for recycling, either for the lithium tech or the new tech, and how does that play into the future plans?
Yeah, that's another really $64 question, I think, right now. And that recycling has come to the front, I would say the last 4 years and last 2 years, really, really seriously. So the model for this is lead acid batteries, which we all start our cars with. And for a decade or more, 99% of lead acid batteries are recycled. A couple of reasons for that. One is it's actually cheaper to get lead for a new battery from an old battery. It's cheaper than digging it out of the ground. That's one reason. And another motivation, of course, lead is toxic. So there are laws in the US, Europe, and most developed countries that you have to recycle lead acid batteries. So it's really down to a science. It's not an art. It's just done on industrial scales. They have the recycling facility on one side of the street, same company, the battery company. Recycle an old battery, it's the lead that you want from it. They'll just ship it across the street, carry it across the street, and it goes into a new battery. We'd like to achieve that for lithium ion. Right now, less than 5% of lithium ion batteries are recycled. And most of our cell phone batteries, frankly, end up on a landfill somewhere, maybe in Southeast Asia. They're not recycled at all just because it's not economically worth it. It costs you money to recycle it rather than saves you money. That can change. When it comes to EVs, we'll have to recycle. We need those recycled batteries to ease supply chain issues. There's some estimates, and we don't know how this might work out, but there's some estimates that with recycling, you might supply 50% of the minerals that you would ordinarily take out of the ground for a new EV battery. You might get them from an old battery. And that would be a tremendous lessening of the pressure on the supply chain. And so there is, in fact, at Argonne, something called RECELL, R-E-C-E-L-L, which is all about recycling lithium ion batteries. It's about 2 years old. It was established by DOE. And RECELL works with industry to talk about how to recycle, and it develops itself with its own R&D ways to recycle. And the sort of traditional way is you heat everything up in a lead acid battery, just heat everything up, things melt and fall to the bottom of the container, and there it's easy to separate the lead because it's so heavy from everything else in the battery. Well, that doesn't work quite so well for a lithium ion because it's a much more complex battery. But nevertheless, there are ways to do the recycling, and I think this is a hot topic both in Europe and in States, and we more or less have to do it if we're going to maintain a viable and competitive EV business.
Okay. I don't know if you have time for maybe one or two more quick ones. I have a question asking if you know what share of total carbon dioxide emissions is due to transportation, either now or in the future projections.
Sure. In the US, it's something like 28%. And interestingly, a couple years ago, actually it was 2016, I think, before 2016, the biggest carbon dioxide emitter was the electricity grid, the power sector. But because coal has declined so fast and because it was such a heavy emitter, transportation is now the top emitter. No sector emits more than transportation. As we were saying earlier, about half of that comes from personal cars. So going after personal cars, electrifying them is really a smart move. That's the biggest emitter within the transportation sector. If we're going to get to zero emissions by 2050, we're going to have to go after those heavy trucks. We're going to have to go after marine shipping and aviation. And I don't think we have the technology for that yet. Lithium ion can certainly handle electrifying personal cars. We might like it to be cheaper. We might like it to charge faster. We might like the battery to last longer, but the batteries we have will be viable and they will be economic, and that's enough. What we have, the technology we have right now is enough to make that happen. Not true, I think, for the heavy trucks, the marine shipping and the aviation. We really do need the next generation battery.
Okay. And I do want to be respectful of your time. I know one more. I have a question asking your thoughts on mechanical batteries.
Oh, I think if I understand right, sometimes that's called gravity storage, lifting a heavy weight up and letting it come down.
So I am not expert enough to answer that for you. It's asking about your thoughts on the mechanical. Oh, yes, they jumped in. Yes, I asked.
Okay, good. Just to be sure we're talking the same language. Yeah, in fact, mechanical batteries are very much like pumped hydro. So water is very easy to pump uphill when you have extra electricity. You pump it, of course, with an electric pump. And when you want that electricity, you let the water fall back down through the pump reverses, it becomes a generator and it generates. And that has been around since, I think, before the 1900s. So in fact, Niagara Falls was one of the first places where that was tried. So that's a very mature technology. Now the question, it's limited by the fact you got to have an elevation, and we don't have much of that in Illinois, and you need water. So why not use something else? Why not just use heavy rocks? And why not lift them with a crane as high as you can build a crane? So a few stories. When you want to save or store electricity, and let the weight fall down and generate electricity in the same way water does when it flows downhill. And it turns out that's actually a pretty good idea. There's not much that can go wrong with it. It's all the technology we need is there, and it's mature, so it's about as good as it's going to get, and it's inexpensive. So there are a lot of proponents of mechanical, sometimes called gravity storage. It's a little easier if you happen to have a cliff that you can just lower. You don't have to build a crane. And there are geologic formations all over the place, at least in the West at least, where you could take advantage of the topology. But you can do it in Illinois. And I think this actually does have a lot of promise. Early stages, you have to get some demonstration projects out there and test at scale to see what the problems really are. But yes, it's really interesting.
Perfect. Okay, Dr. Crabtree, we are up against it on time for you. So we'll cut off questions here. If there's anything else, please feel free to send it to us, and we'll send it Dr. Crabtree's way.
Yeah. I would be happy to answer by email. Absolutely.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor. It's been fantastic. And if we were live, you would get a big round of applause right now. So pretend you're hearing hands clapping. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Todd.
All right. Take care.
Bye now.
So I appreciate everybody. Right now, we're going to do a little CED promotion. Never going to pass up an opportunity to reach out to our current investors, and always thank you for supporting the Center for Economic Development. But we also know there's non-investors that join us for these webinars, and I want to make sure that we at least tell a little bit of our story. The Center for Economic Development is a not-for-profit economic development corporation. We're actually celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. We were formed originally in Joliet in 1981 when we were going through a rather rough patch with the regional and national economy. Certainly manufacturing took it on the chin, and because of that, Will County suffered dramatically in terms of job loss and corporate closures and whatnot. So we were created to do a very simple mission: improve the quality of life for all residents in the county by recruiting new companies, which offer high quality jobs and a solid tax base. But we also pay attention to the folks that are making payroll today, We spend a fair amount of time working with our existing companies to help them expand and grow. And our funding is from private and public sector investors. Most of our funding comes from the private sector. That's always been the case, and we truly thank all of the private corporations and the local and county units of government that support us financially. Our services to business, obviously free of charge. And something I always like to remind our investors is that everything that we do for companies that we're trying to keep here or recruit here, these are all available to you as a company doing business in Will County. Because most of our work is revolving around locations and buildings and sites. We have a great real estate database. We do a lot of economic data and research. Our market and labor force information is top notch. It's always current. And if something's not available easily, we'll go out and do some primary research. That's how important it is for us to have current information. One stop for shop for business incentives. A big part of our service is simply helping guide projects through whatever process they need to go through. Many times it's a matter of introducing a company to the mayor or a county board person or maybe an area legislator and help them get a little better feel for the landscape and also going through the entitlement process. Zoning changes, building permits, accelerating review of what often can be very timely and expensive project delays. We try to short circuit that. Government affairs, we have a very active government affairs program. And oftentimes that's not something we broadcast enough, and it's something that we would like to see more of our investors get involved with. We have an active government affairs committee. And we look specifically at legislation and regulations and other impediments to business that affect our local companies. And if there's something that we can do in the way of supporting a bill or opposing a piece of legislation or a new tax or other thing, regulation that hurts business, we'll get in the mix. And then, of course, infrastructure is so important to Will County and its future. And it's not just transportation, even though that's a very important part of what the CED is involved with, but we're talking about broadband, we're talking about water and sewer, we're talking about energy, everything that makes Will County a great place to do business, but also to, live, work, and play. So that's our story. We have over 200 investors, and they're primarily leaders from business and government. That's a great way to rub elbows with folks that you might want to be talking to in terms of your business success and what you're involved with in your environment. Many business sectors are represented in our membership, over 20 different business and industry sectors. More than likely, your industry sector is some investors involved with our activities. As I mentioned, we have a number of different boards, committees, and coalitions, as you can see. So we're always encouraging investors and prospective investors to take a close look at what we're doing with our committees and seeing if there's something that you might find interesting and beneficial to what you do in your business and personal life. So if you're looking for more information, please contact our Vice President of Investor Relations, Julie Wilkinson. She can provide the information, the connections, and anything that you might need to learn a little bit more about the CED. And if you're not an investor, at least possibly consider doing that. So again, I want to thank all of you, our investors, and hopefully potential investors that are out there, and welcome aboard. And we're going to continue what we've been doing for the last 40 years. And there's been a lot of success here, so thank you. Our next speaker is actually not the speaker for ComEd. He's going to introduce our ComEd speaker. Many of you know John McCann. He's a board member of the CED. ComEd's a big supporter of the Center for Economic Development. And John spends all of his time in the economic development space with ComEd. And John, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you, John. And thanks, ComEd, again, for being our sponsor today.
First of all, John, thank you. Hopefully you guys can hear me. You're right. You don't want to hear from me on this topic. That's why we bring in the experts. But I do want to pause and pile on a little bit and thank you for all the work that you guys do at the CED. Obviously, economic development is what I focus on, but you guys are a great partner. To that end, electricity is our business, obviously. It's crucial for the more than 4 million customers that we serve here in Northern Illinois. And what's most important to us is that we continue to provide reliable and affordable electricity for all our customers when and how our customers want it. But at the same time, ensuring that we are adapting to the changing needs of our customers. So our electrical grid needs to evolve just to accommodate the adoption of electric vehicles like George talked about and incorporate distributed energy resources. Things like microgrid, solar power, battery storage, and eventually vehicle to grid capabilities. So to that end, I would like to introduce Daniel Kushner. Daniel is the manager of smart grid programs at ComEd, and he leads the development and strategic planning for our Grid of the Future initiatives, including content deployment on emerging technologies, energy storage, microgrids, and smart city deployments. So Daniel, all yours.
Thank you, John and John. So as John just mentioned, my name is Daniel Kushner. I'm a manager of smart grid programs at ComEd, and I'm really excited to be here today because the topic that we're talking about how advanced energy technologies can enable a resilient future, is really at the heart of what we're doing in smart grid organization at ComEd, as well as the whole company. As John was referencing earlier, ComEd's at a basic level, ComEd's commitment is to keep the lights on. But we do this really as part of a larger role in enabling the development and deployment of different technologies that can drive economic development, as well as achieving broader regional goals such as sustainability and resiliency. And so excited to talk about all the ways that we're doing this. As most of you know, ComEd has been around for more than a century. We can trace our tradition of innovation back to those who worked with Thomas Edison and the light bulb. And that innovative tradition is an important part of what we do and how we operate a grid that provides the reliability and resiliency needed to ensure optimal service for all of our customers. ComEd is one of the largest electric utilities in the United States, and as Don mentioned, serves more than 4 million customers in Northern Illinois, including the city of Chicago. We're responsible for the third largest metropolitan area measured by GDP in the country. And to do this, we bring to bear the talents of more than 6,000 employees who operate a grid that contains more than 5,000 circuit miles of transmission, 66,000 circuit miles of primary distribution, and more than 550,000 distribution transformers. But as you see on the next slide, that's really changing. That grid, which has functioned for more than a century, and the personnel managing it are facing a world that is evolving. The effects of climate change are apparent in a wide range of aspects, but perhaps the most significant is in the form of the rapid increase in the number and the size of major weather events. To give you a perspective on some of the events increasing the pressure for evolution, 2019 was the 5th consecutive year in which 10 or more major weather and climate disaster events impacted the United States. Just this past August, communities across the Midwest, including those within ComEd service territory, felt the impact of a derecho, which appeared and escalated very quickly, pummeling ComEd's entire territory with hurricane-force winds, including gusts of more than 100 miles an hour. 15 tornadoes spun off from the derecho winds within the region, and 13 of them touched down in communities we serve. This Midwestern storm put the intensity of climate-related major weather events into perspective. Billion-dollar weather and climate disasters are occurring everywhere, not just in coastal towns and cities. And then again, earlier this year, we received another reminder of the human impact of these events, when Texas suffered 3 severe winter storms that led to more than 4.5 million homes and businesses to lose power. Beyond the scale of these events, that the Texas grid would have to face challenges associated with cold is a reminder that the changing climate requires utilities to develop and deploy the capabilities that allow them to face the breadth of challenges. These weather-related events are happening in a context when the threat of physical and cyber terrorism against energy infrastructure is becoming more salient. Simultaneously, the onset of COVID-19 has reminded us that a resilient grid requires a healthy workforce to operate it, as well as all the ways that the electric grid's connection to the communications infrastructure enables education to continue, businesses to function, and events like these to happen. The utility of the future needs to consider all of these factors. On the next slide, we talk about how while the requirements of the energy system are increasing, the nature of the grid is shifting as well. As the cost of solar PV declines and the value of clean generation, including to mitigate the effects of climate change, become ever more apparent, we're seeing increased and accelerating levels of adoption of distributed energy resources. As of February, we received 452 applications to interconnect solar to our system this year alone, and our application pace is currently almost 24 per day. We recognize that our customers, residential and business alike, want a clean energy future, and that part of that includes fully leveraging the possibilities of this form of generation. These technologies provide technical benefits as well. By siting generation close to load, we can potentially use some of these resources to support advanced grid technologies like microgrids, while providing higher levels of resiliency. But this intermittent generation can also pose technical challenges, unless there are the grid capabilities to fully integrate a form of generation, which had barely been contemplated when the grid was first designed. As George mentioned, as we talk on the next slide, we're seeing also the growth of energy storage, including in the form of electric vehicles, and that this technology, along with solar PV, is changing the grid that ComEd has the responsibility to operate. The penetration of electric vehicles is growing across the world, but including in our service territory. Last year, Governor Pritzker proposed a goal of 750,000 electric vehicles in Illinois by 2030. This is in conjunction with, as George was referencing earlier, the broad pushes from the federal government as well. At the pace that we're seeing now within our service territory, however, that number might not even be ambitious enough. Our internal modeling shows a baseline projection of approximately 800,000 electric vehicles by 2030. These electric vehicles can provide enormous benefits, not only to helping our service territory mitigate the effects of climate change by reducing carbon, but also by reducing the particulate matter in our air that can pose health challenges. A recent study published by the Journal of the American Medical Association estimated that air pollution was the leading cause of roughly 100,000 deaths per year. The EPA estimates that more than 90% of the health damages from air pollution are caused by particulate matter. Those health impacts aren't felt equally across our communities. Estimates are that African American households experience 54% higher levels of particulate matter exposure than other households. Hispanic households are exposed to 63% more pollution than their consumption causes. The cruel effects of these disparities are seen all the more clearly with the effects of COVID-19. For all of the advantages associated with beneficial electrification, however, providing the grid infrastructure to integrate these new technologies requires thought and planning. That service of tomorrow cannot be provided with the technology of today. Perhaps our most exciting project is the Bronzeville Community microgrid, which is appearing on the next slide. As many of you might be aware, microgrids are portions of the electric grid that can operate either as part of the grid or independently of it. In other words, under normal circumstances, customers served by a microgrid experience no difference in service. If, however, a disruptive event occurs, a microgrid will island from the rest of the grid and continue to provide power. It's that islanding capability, which is why experts from the Department of Energy to the Department of Defense have determined microgrids are so valuable in enhancing resiliency of not just the grid, but the communities that rely upon it. ComEd selected Bronzeville as a location to demonstrate this technology after leveraging with the support of partnerships with government organizations from the Department of Energy to the Department of Homeland Security, a holistic, data-driven methodology to identify which portion of the service territory would most benefit from the resiliency provided. This microgrid will serve more than 1,000 residences, businesses, and public institutions, including 11 customers who were identified as providing critical public services, such as the headquarters of the Chicago Fire and Police Departments. Beyond the customers directly served, this microgrid will help the neighborhood serve as an oasis in the event of such a disruptive event like we've seen in the past and too frequently, by enabling first responders to meet the needs of residents living within the microgrid footprint, as well as the broader region. The microgrid is powered with a variety of distributed energy resources, or DER, including 750 kilowatts of solar PV and 500 kilowatts, 2 megawatt hours of energy storage. It'll be part of the first utility-operated microgrid cluster designed to cluster with an existing microgrid located at the Illinois Institute of Technology. These clustering capabilities allow for an expanded microgrid footprint, covering wider swaths of the population than a single microgrid. But beyond the microgrid cluster, the real significance of this project is how it demonstrates technologies that can provide higher levels of service across our service territory. As part of this project, we are demonstrating 6 technologies which have received the support from the Department of Energy. For each of these technologies, we're partnering with institutions from universities, the national labs like Argonne, the vendors, to develop, demonstrate, and deploy the advanced capabilities needed to integrate renewable generation and beneficial electrification, while providing the higher levels of resiliency that our territory requires. For example, the ability to extend the project to include the additional microgrid footprint from IIT is supported by a project backed by the Department of Energy to develop and demonstrate a microgrid master controller, which will be able to operate not just one microgrid, but the entire microgrid cluster. This helps expand the range of resiliency and enhancing technologies, as well as integrating distributed renewable generation. The deployment of the solar and battery I mentioned earlier are part of a microgrid integrated solar storage technology, which is also supported by the Department of Energy and which we've developed in partnership with institutions like Argonne, where we use energy storage, smart inverter technology, and advanced control capabilities to make solar PV act as if it's a controllable resource, making it easier to meet our region's sustainability goals and encourage businesses to be able to deploy the amount of distributed energy resources that meet their needs. These are just 2 examples of a wide range of technologies which appear on the next slide that we are demonstrating both inside and outside the Bronzeville Community microgrid. What you see here are brief descriptions of all of the technologies that ComEd is doing with the support of the Department of Energy, which is one portion of the innovative technologies that we are demonstrating on the grid to provide this higher level of service. In the interest of time and patience, I won't go into all of these, though if one of the titles catches your eye, I'd be glad to talk about them in detail during the Q&A. What I do want to note is the breadth of technologies and innovations that are needed to integrate the clean energy technologies with sufficient resiliency to meet the needs of our communities. This requires advanced sensor technology like we're demonstrating with the SIMPLE project, but also to use the data in sophisticated ways like the hybrid state estimation project that helps us have the visibility needed to integrate these solar and other distributed energy resources. Simultaneously, we're demonstrating ways to better integrate electric vehicle technologies, including with the demonstration of a cyber-secure, extreme fast charging EV technology. These technology demonstrations are part of a larger vision that we see on the next slide, in which we deploy the capabilities to integrate sufficient clean energy technologies to meet our region's sustainability goals, provide the clean air that our communities need, the electric resiliency to face any and all emerging challenges, while encouraging businesses to deploy what is needed in order to meet their goals. These capabilities include voltage optimization and distributed voltage optimization that allow customers to use less energy without changing behavior. Advanced control capabilities like Distributed Energy Resource Management System, or DERMS, that allow us to integrate DER like solar while deferring traditional upgrades. And advanced EV charging infrastructure that makes it easier to deploy the beneficial electrification for fleets and other portions of businesses. All of these technologies are dependent on sensor technologies providing higher levels of grid observability, including those referenced earlier. Making them function to the level needed requires an advanced communications infrastructure that enables the data to be used in a timely fashion that is needed in order to allow grid operators to meet any emerging challenge and provide the level of service needed. As we look at the granular and technical pieces that are comprising the future of energy, it's important to keep in mind what this level of resiliency means for the communities we're serving. On the next slide, we talk about how our Community of the Future initiative is built around the microgrid, but it best illustrates what the advanced technologies can do to provide community resiliency. Community of the Future is what we call the program that we're deploying in Bronzeville. That is built upon the Bronzeville microgrid, but what it shows is how advanced energy technologies can help enable a higher level of service when it's integrated with partnerships with local communities. What we've recognized in this experience is that electric utilities like ComEd can mobilize educational programs, community events, new technologies, and measures for resiliency with collaboration from local government and stakeholders, working together to produce a culture of innovation that produces real value to communities. This vision for Community of the Future is a place where ComEd partners with local stakeholders to create a smart community that is connected, green, and resilient, leveraging all of the technologies that are associated with the smart grid to enhance the everyday lives of community members. In Bronzeville, the Community of the Future is home to a vast and growing number of programs and projects, from off-grid renewable energy-powered streetlights to smart kiosks that provide high-speed internet and wayfinding services to an augmented reality mural that shows not only key figures from Bronzeville's history, but how communities can build off this record of innovation to deploy the practices and technologies needed to mitigate climate change and prepare for the energy world of the future. This matters because the future of energy must be informed by social and environmental consciousness that is responding to the changing world along with technological innovation. And what we believe is that much of what we're demonstrating in Bronzeville can pose as an example for what can happen across our service territory with partnerships in order to leverage advanced energy technologies and showing the variety of ways in which it can help community stakeholders meet their needs. What we know and have found is that these advanced technologies need to be rooted in the community and leverages them, and that implementing smart city solutions also means enhancing environmental and social resiliency. This model has the potential to benefit the entire service territory. By tracking best practices, benchmarking case studies, and gathering metrics, we as an industry and as a region have the power to replicate and deploy the successful technologies, strategies, and business models need to enable smart, connected communities of the future that provide value in a variety of ways. Thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to any questions you might have.
Thank you, Daniel. Very interesting. I'm going to start off with a question. The Bronzeville pilot is fascinating, but we live in a urban, suburban, ex-urban county, and obviously, when you have density of users and facilities and your own infrastructure, I can see where this new smart world, this smart grid, can easily be applied. How does that work out in the suburbs? I mean, is my little subdivision going to be smart someday?
Absolutely. So it really depends on it really depends on figuring out the right technology to meet the needs of each individual scenario. So the smart grid really began with the deployment of smart meters that really serves our entire service territory. And what that enables.
Did we lose Daniel?
John, I was wondering if he froze up for just me or for everyone. I think what he was going to talk about was, I'm not the engineer here, but smart meters, when we deploy those, there's so many possibilities across our service territory with smart meters. And Dan, when he joins back in, can talk about this a little bit further. But we're seeing applications to be able to piggyback on the smart meters with water, So being able to read the water meters, but even more so to understand how customers are using their power in their houses, and not necessarily to use that, from a we're watching over you standpoint, but to also be able to, or I guess more so to be able to help you understand your usage patterns. What might be more beneficial time for you to use, critical power, right? So you've got your base power, which obviously for your appliances, your refrigerators, ice boxes, things like that. But I think the smart meters offer so much more ability to be able to kind of control when you power up other devices. So again, Daniel can probably provide a little bit more educated context in that, but smart meters will certainly pave the way for a lot of the things that we're doing within the smart grid.
Thanks, John. Looks like Daniel's back.
I'm so sorry.
He can
That's
correct
all right.
everything I said.
Perfect. Thank you, Daniel. Thanks for jumping back on. Appreciate your flexibility there. So we do have a couple of questions in the queue, and one that I want to put in front of you is, what are the critical path issues that local communities need to address in order to collaborate most efficiently with ComEd in implementing smart grid initiatives?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
So what's the critical path, or what do communities need to do to best collaborate with ComEd on implementing some of these smart grid programs?
That's a really interesting question. So I think a lot of this is an answer to John's question before earlier, that we're really focusing on trying to find the right grid technology to meet each of the individual needs. And so John McCann might have gone over this, but a lot of smart grid technologies are already covering the breadth of the service territory, everything from smart meters to voltage optimization. But some of the technologies are really designed to meet in particular needs. So for example, in areas where we're seeing large-scale adoption of solar PV, including around Mendota, we're demonstrating different technologies, including a distributed energy resource management system, a DERMS technology that can help integrate that solar in addition to the wind power without requiring any being able to defer costly grid upgrades. And I think in general, what we're trying to do is always using the examples that we're seeing from the demonstration projects in Bronzeville and in other parts of our service territory to be able to think holistically about the best response for the particular needs of different customers and for different needs. And as we're seeing increased adoption of solar, increased adoption of electric vehicles, to be able to access the best and the most innovative technological solutions to enable customers to achieve their goals, providing them the level of resiliency that they need, while also the level of sustainability that we're looking to accomplish.
Great, thank you for that. You had just mentioned, again, some solar adoption, and you used a number earlier in the presentation that you're seeing roughly 24 solar applications a day. Who are those people? Is that commercial applications? Is that residential applications? What do the splits look like for that?
It runs the gamut. We're really seeing a growth of interest across different customer classes. We're seeing residential as well as commercial customers, and we're really expecting that to increase as we're seeing increased interest and increased interest not just from individuals, but also policymakers. And so what we're really trying to do with these technologies is to be able to prepare the grid to meet whatever third parties are looking to adopt.
And so that's another question we had come in, was just on, as you adopt the grid, what does the grid look like today in terms of storage of energy, and kind of what are some of your goals in that space?
Yeah, so ComEd is already demonstrating a number of different energy storage technologies. So most of them deal with a slightly different use case than a lot of what George was referencing earlier. But really what we've already done is include energy storage projects to defer capacity upgrades, which we've done both at the feeder level and the substation level. And then also projects like we're seeing in the Bronzeville microgrid of using energy storage to integrate renewables into a particular community. And I think we're really thinking about what are additional ways that we can show the value of energy storage to meeting our goals. Energy storage is a really exciting technology with a lot of different potential value streams that come from it. And we're thinking holistically about making sure that we're always using the best technology to meet the particular needs of the grid.
Great. And last one that I saw come across is just for comparison's sake. So ComEd serves northern, northeastern Illinois. How do we compare to some other parts, other utilities in terms of what we're doing with the smart grid, and are we competitive?
That's a really interesting question. So ComEd is actually the utility that I believe has deployed the most smart meters, which gives us a lot of data that a lot of other utilities don't have quite as much access to. We're also leaders in the field of things like voltage optimization. I think there are other utilities, however, that have seen a lot more solar adoption and electric vehicle adoption, but we're expecting to see that coming into our system as well. And so that's why we're really excited by projects like the Bronzeville microgrid, which is really a trendsetter in the industry across the United States and frankly the world about how to best respond to some of these changing conditions. And so we feel like these innovative technologies like this puts us in good stead to be able to respond to as we're starting to see increased interest in adoption of different technologies that make the grid something very different than what it was a century ago.
I'm going to piggyback on that question, Doug. One of the things is, as you know, in economic development, we try and identify what separates us from states like Indiana, Wisconsin, Iowa, and other states, right? There's a particular group, Grid Modernization Index, and they rank all 50 states in terms of where their grid, the utility grids are in terms of modernizing. For years, we've always been number 2 because of all the work with the smart grid infrastructure. The only state ranked above us in grid modernization is California. And like Wisconsin, I think is 45th. I don't know all the states off the top of my head, but we're way out above the rest of our Midwestern neighbors in terms of modernizing our grid.
And I know certainly the reliability matters for the companies that we work with and for a lot of our investors. So that's good stuff. So thank you for that. And as I look through the question queue, I think we're in good shape. So maybe turn it back over to you, John.
Okay, excellent. Daniel, thank you so much for your words and answering some questions. And I'm fascinated by the technology. I learned a lot in our earlier meetings looking at your slides, and you embellished some things, and looking forward to continuing our work with ComEd. And both John and Daniel, thanks again for sponsoring. I just have a few comments to make, one of which is, as I said at the outset, positing a webinar on the future of energy is sort of presumptuous on our part, and we recognize that. There's so many stories to the energy picture today and in the future. One comment I'll make is how important this sector is to our economy here locally, with our refineries, our power plants, and the pipelines, and the transmission of raw product and finished product. Really benefits all of us, certainly on the business side, but as a resident of Will County. And so we're proud to work side by side with our energy companies and do what we can to make sure that they continue to succeed and employ many thousands of people in very good paying jobs. So hats off to the energy company. Again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thanks again to ComEd for being our sponsor. And if you need some additional information, obviously our website, willcountyced.com, and you can catch the entire performance here today on our Will County CED YouTube channel. So I'm going to close with a thanks for coming and Godspeed. Thank you.
Thank you, John.